13th meeting of the Planning Policy Commission. The first thing I want to do is a call to action. As you all can see, there's a lot of empty seats up here, which will be up for some of them, not all of them, will be up for renewal. And so if you have any interest in joining the Planning Policy Commission, would certainly love to see an application from you. You will hear a bunch of things this evening on the projects that we're going to be working on. If they interest you, if you feel you can contribute, please do fill out an application. The first thing on our agenda is approval of minutes from the November 21st meeting of the Planning Policy Commission. Since we don't have a quorum as of yet, but we are expecting that person to arrive, we're going to go to discussion on the proposed comp plan amendments. If you're out there in television land and you don't have an agenda, what's going to happen tonight is Jason is going to make a presentation on what the proposals are for any changes in the comp plan. After his presentation, we are going to have a public hearing where you get to give us input on any of the comp plan amendments. And then we're going to have a presentation from Arthur Sullivan, who is going to talk about ARCH and housing in the area. So Jason, why don't you start?
Thanks, Joan. My name is Jason Rogers. I'm an associate planner with the city's Development Services Department. So tonight I'll be talking about the docket of proposed comprehensive plan amendments. This is something we do every year. Amendments to the comprehensive plan, or rather, the Growth Management Act requires that we do a continuing review and evaluation of the comprehensive plan, but it only allows amendments once a year, and it recommends that cities and counties establish a formal method of taking in all the various review items that we want to do in 1 year. We implement this with the docket of proposed amendments. This year, there is a major state mandated update, which must be completed by June 30th, 2015, and so we're kicking that off basically right now. This is to ensure compliance with the Growth Management Act, and there have been some changes to the Growth Management Act in the last few years that we'll be taking a look at. There have also been some court cases interpreting GMA and various land use and planning laws that we'll have to take into account. The new PSRC Vision 2040 plan, which was adopted fairly recently, and then the King County countywide planning policies. And you can see along the bottom, I borrowed this graphic from PSRC, but this kind of shows the bigger picture regional planning process that has happened. You know, they've adopted Vision 2040, various regional plans have updated, the countywide planning policies, and that you can see outlined in red, update comprehensive plan. So that's where we're at right now, and that's what we're doing in Issaquah. So the timeline for this, last year we started, and early this year we started gathering potential comprehensive plan amendments. They can come from the administration, they can come from the public, anybody can propose one. By code, we're supposed to hold the public hearing in January for this. We had to continue the public hearing until today, so we're here tonight to review the docket, hold a public hearing, and so the commission can make a recommendation to the city council. The city council will consider it in March, the Land and Shore Committee of the council, and the council will formally adopt the docket hopefully in April. This is taken from the land use code, and I know it's completely illegible on the screen. This just shows what we call the level 6 review, and all these bubbles are different steps in the process, showing that we are at the moment all the way back up here at PPC public hearing, where PPC will hopefully make a recommendation tonight to the city council, and then it'll move on to a council decision at the bottom. As for code amendments, I know historically we have provided the commission at the beginning of the year with a list of code amendments that we plan on working on. We haven't done this in recent years for a variety of reasons. We can amend the municipal code at any time. There's no limit on how many times per year. It's more a question of how heavy our workload is and how heavy the commission's workload is. We still plan to do some code amendments this year, but we're not going to really discuss them much tonight. So this is the next few slides here is just the the proposed docket, and you have this in your packet. There's 3 pages to this, and I've got some more detail, in the next few slides. But as you can see, there's 17 of them, which is quite a few, many more than we normally do. So the first 3, 1, 2, and 3, are annual amendments. We do these every year. It's the capital facilities and transportation improvement updates. This is to make sure everything's consistent between our adopted plans and the comprehensive plan. Population updates, we get a revised population estimate from the State Office of Financial Management in the middle of the year. We'll utilize that to help determine our level of service with capital facilities. And also, if the city has bought any property in the last year, we would, and assuming we are using it for public purpose, we would rezone it and redesignate it on our various maps. There are a few carryover amendments that have been on the docket for a bit. One is the Central Issaquah Plan. This has been going for a long time. At this point, what this amendment was really intended to cover is just a little bit of cleanup. The plan was adopted at the end of 2012. We adopted the development and design standards early last year. I know the commission has seen a lot of this over the years. This amendment is really just to review the sub-area boundaries, which was one of the last tasks in the Central Issaquah Plan. But hasn't been accomplished yet. Number 5 is...
I have a question.
Yeah.
When I was on the environmental review study for the Central Area Plan, it was decided that there was enough space to put all the people and traffic could be manipulated to be reasonable.
Mm-hmm.
But what they didn't do was divide housing within the 10 sections. Are there plans to do that? There are certain areas that maybe something can't be built. If there's,
Right.
We're figuring 7,500 people, we're going to need, we don't want to build 4 stories for 9
Mm-hmm.
parcels and then the 10th one have a 20-story building. So how do you divide that?
Right.
Are you looking at that?
Am I on now? Part of it is we're doing a monitoring report every year as part of the plan, and it's part of it's monitoring where the housing is going. And if we're finding that most of it's going in the core, or we're hoping most of it's going to go, then that'll be great. But if we're finding we're getting just sprinkles of it, and we want it to be in a different way, we can try to fiddle with the either the regulations or the incentives to make it go more where we would want to go. But when we first thought about, do you allocate 400 units, we didn't want to mess with the market, because if the market wanted it all in the urban core with all the mixed uses, we didn't want to put a barrier in the way by saying, no, you can only have this many. So we sort of wanted to see how the market went for the first few years.
Well, I understand that part of it,
Okay.
but there are areas that only so much area exists for building. If we're planning to put parks and other facilities within that space, is that wetlands, is, how much is not able to
buildable
be
lands
built is
versus-
what I'm concerned about.
I don't think we got to that fine-grained of how many can it actually hold per se. I mean, we have buildable lands information on capacities, but we haven't gotten it fine-grained district by district on how much is available.
I just think that's important to know where you can build and how much you can build on it.
Mm-hmm.
Go ahead.
Okay. The number 5 for carryover, the second carryover amendment is Klahani. This was put on because at the time we were creating the docket, obviously there's an election a couple of nights ago. They're still counting the votes. We'll see how it turns out. But this was a if necessary amendment, because we didn't want to have to wait a long time to be able to amend our various maps and comprehensive plan policies to accommodate Klahani should that be necessary. The bike and pedestrian plan is also back. We were hoping to get this done toward the end of last year, and unfortunately that did not happen. But the development of that plan is ongoing, and so when that gets complete, we'll be looking to integrate a lot of the recommendations and policies from that into the comprehensive plan, both in the, mostly in the transportation element probably, but also in the land use element and possibly in some other places. Annexation of the Issaquah Middle School unincorporated island. This was actually completed, I believe, very early this year.
December.
Yeah, in December. Unfortunately, it didn't quite make the cutoff for the actual package of amendments from last year, so it's an outstanding item, but we've already annexed the island. The Sustainable Indicators Project, it would investigate the goals and policies for indicators, building off the work from the indicator sounding board. This is something, again, we were hoping to do last year, and unfortunately it didn't get done. But now with the major update underway, we're hoping to be able to take advantage of that and partner with the Office of Sustainability to continue moving this forward. The brand new amendments is number 9 through 17, and this covers an amendment of every element that's in the comprehensive plan. So that's land use, housing, transportation, utilities, and on down the list. And what we'll be doing throughout the year is, we'll be working on all these, on amending all these elements, and they're all linked together, of course, into one big comprehensive plan. But the idea here is we'll be working on these, and we'll be bringing them to Planning Policy Commission throughout the year. And so, for example, we'll work on housing pretty early this year. And so we'll bring the housing element. You're going to talk about housing later tonight. And so you'll get a chance to review every individual element as the year goes on. And then toward the end of the year, we're going to bring them all together at once so that you can review the entire package of amendments in one go and make a recommendation to the City Council. Oops, I don't know why that one got on there. So tonight, excuse me, there's the public hearing, and we'll ask the Commission to make a recommendation to the City Council. And then again, the Council will review it in March and hopefully approve it in April.
Great.
So,
Any questions
that's
before the public hearing?
Any questions? Hearing none.
Just out of curiosity, what the latest vote count is on the Kalani annexation?
as of the update this afternoon, it is 29 votes in favor of not annexing, is the margin.
Okay, thanks.
With that, if Jason, if you're done and there's no further discussion here, I'm going to open the public hearing.
I didn't put a list out.
So I'm going to open the public hearing at 6:44 and ask if there's anybody here that wants to make any comments on the comp plan. Hearing and seeing none, I'm going to close the public hearing at 6:45.
Okay.
We now have a majority of commissioners here, so I don't know if we should vote on this now, or does, I'm not sure if you've read the docket of information on the comp plan, if you've heard the explanation that Jason has.
I'm certainly available to answer questions.
I'm not
Just
sure
in
quite how to handle
In
that.
summary, the docket is the list. It's not actually the completed projects, it's just the list of items that we're working on this year, because we can only amend the comprehensive plan once. So state law says we have to make a list in the beginning of the year, and then we have to hold to that list for the year, and we can't add anything new in the middle of the year, so that everyone in the community understands what we're working on this year. And so the docket is the list that we're going to work on this year.
So why don't we do it this way? Let's let Jason sit down and have Mr. Sullivan come up and talk a little bit about Arch, and then give Ray a little time to go over it, and then we will vote on sending it off to the council.
Okay? Does
Okay.
that seem okay? And then
Joan-
you can...
Joan, can I just ask a
you can
question
go.
real quick?
Sure.
Point of order, since we have a quorum here, and I may have to leave a little bit early here to get to an 8 o'clock meeting, and we still
Oh,
need to
that's
approve
right.
meeting minutes from prior. Should we just get this done and
Okay.
just a suggestion?
Um,
I mean, let's let Ray ask questions, or if Jason wants to go, just flip back through the slides real quick, whatever Ray needs to do to get up to speed, I just think we should do it while we've got people here.
That's a strategy too?
Well, let's do the minutes. I'm assuming that you've all read the minutes from the last meeting. Do I have a motion to approve the minutes?
So moved?
Do I have a second?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
The minutes are approved. So we will continue on with the ARCH presentation. So, Mr. Sullivan, if you'd like to come up.
Yeah.
Before I turn it over, let me just. Evening. So a little context for the conversation here tonight with you is we're going to be working with your staff and the commission to the update to the housing element. And under state law, and you're going to see a little bit more on this in a second, part of that is doing a housing needs analysis, which you received in your packet. Issaquah is a member of a partnership through an interlocal agreement with the other cities in East King County. So ARCH is that partnership. We act as your staff and staff to other cities. What we're doing tonight is hopefully providing you some background context. All of this information is in the materials you received, but Mike Stanger from our office is going to sort of lead you through a conversation about what are some of the issues and needs and housing supply issues. This is all meant to try to help set up the conversation when we come back with staff in a few months to talk about policies in your comprehensive plan in the housing element specifically. So this is meant to give you some flavor and context of demographics, housing supply, things you've maybe done in the past, and we really mean to open this up for you and for this interrupt at any point, meant to be sort of a conversation to let you start talking about what you see as housing issues, responding to any information we have if something feels like you'd like to see if there is other information. But this is hopefully to get you thinking about housing issues more explicitly, but also give us a little bit of direction on things that are of interest to you. So with that, if you don't have any introductory comments, Mike's here to sort of help you walk through a variety of kind of information. And again, as we said, please feel free to jump in with questions at any point. I'm going to sit up right up front here too, and we're here to be a resource to you to sort of explain and give you context.
Before we start, can I invite the Human Services folks to come up to the, I know you're not used to being on TV, but you guys will look fabulous on TV, and it might be easier for you to discuss and ask questions when you're not sort of in the cheap seats in the back where there's no microphones and no one would be able to hear your comments or questions. It's really a happy place up here, truly.
Actually, while you're getting settled, I'm going to ask if Ray is ready to vote on the comp plan. So I need a motion to approve the comp plan as presented tonight and November 21st, I think we talked about it, to send it on to council for review. So I need a motion for that.
So moved.
Do I have a second?
I second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay.
Super.
Welcome
Thank
to
you.
the Planning Policy Human Services Commission meeting.
And because you don't have name tags, I'm going to see if I get it. Bill, is that right? And Leo. It's going to, and I've forgotten your name. Jennifer. Okay, super. And you guys have your name tags up. Oh, good, good. Thank you. Okay.
Okay, thanks, Trish.
And this is Mike.
My name's Mike. Happy to be here. I'm a planner with ARCH. And Arthur gave the best intro to the purpose for us being here, but I'd like to step back and address what was in your packet for just a moment. This East King County housing analysis is a project that we undertook at the request of all our cities to do an east side wide or a market wide look at housing conditions and needs for all of our cities. And then through the course of when each city was ready to start their comp plan, then we would do a specialized section and look at the needs and conditions of your community. So there's going to be an additional section that you'll receive after we have the benefit of this discussion tonight that will look a little bit more closely at not only data as it pertains to Issaquah, but also neighborhood conditions, strategies that you've undertaken, and so forth. So I do have a lot of information prepared, a lot of it's data-oriented. Arthur's going to make sure that I don't get too geeky with you about it. And as he said, the most important part of it is that we try to get a conversation going. So, because you are the residents, you're the commissioners, you have those perspectives, not just as public officials, but also as people who use housing, and we want to know what those perspectives are. We hope that the data that I present helps kind of stimulate your thinking a little bit. But please, again, interrupt with questions or comments as we go along. Oops, I forgot to take out the transition things. So here's how we've set up the presentation tonight. I'll talk a little bit, as Jason did. Since he covered some of it already, I'll run through the context based on the Growth Management Act and why we're going through this process. But then we'll look at the data that we're calling the housing analysis, both from a demand standpoint and a supply standpoint, and some interaction between those things. And then we'll talk about the various strategies that Issaquah can and has, in many cases, adopted. The reason that we're undertaking this process, as Jason said, was that all cities who are required to plan are required to update those comp plans within the next year and a half. And the goals pertaining to housing are that hopefully the planning will help make housing affordable in every community to all economic segments, that it will stimulate and support a variety of different housing types and densities, and help preserve the existing housing stock, not just for historical sake, but because existing housing is often more affordable. Comp plans are required by the Growth Management Act to have a housing element, and they have to include these things that are listed here. We have to do the housing analysis, which this document fulfills. You have to, through this process and more specifically in the land use and the land use map, ensure that there's sufficient land for the housing that's expected in the future, and again that the plan makes it possible for the city to accommodate housing needs of all economic segments.
I have a quick question.
Yes.
What's your definition of affordable housing?
We will get right to that shortly.
Okay. I just want to make sure.
Thank you. Jason also mentioned that the countywide planning policies, which is a guiding framework, if you will, for all the cities in the county, have guidelines for the city's plans, and those were reshaped in this last go-around in 2012. And most noteworthy, they point out that local governments do have a role, responsibility in housing. We recognize that we don't produce housing, but we have a very definite impact on it. That cities in their plans should account for the county-wide needs for very low, and moderate income households and housing that's affordable to them, and take proactive measures towards a fair share or proportionate share of that need. Also recognizing that each city has unique conditions, and that certain strategies that may work in one type of community won't work in another type of community. So it's not intended to force cities to adopt a one-size-fits-all approach. And then to ensure that there's this feedback loop, if you will, and that there's a four-step process to follow up on the planning, to monitor what the results are, and then look back at the policies and strategies and see that they're reshaped as necessary to gain the desired results. So here we talk about what affordable housing means. and what specifically what is very low, what's low, and what's moderate income housing. Affordable housing in general, it kind of begs the question about affordable for who. And so when we work with cities, we work with this kind of framework based on what is the median or middle income of the county at a given point in time. And this shows based on the 2013 median income of $86,700, that applies to a family of 4. And 80% of that median income we call moderate income, and then low at 50%, and 30% is what we call very low income. This table shows the income as it's scaled down for each case. Different size households are adjusted accordingly, and then what the maximum housing costs are affordable housing units in each case. Does this help answer your question?
Yes.
Okay, great. So the countywide planning policy said that each community should try to address a proportionate share of the countywide need. What is that need? How many households are we talking about? What this chart shows is that when the numbers that were examined to base the countywide planning policies showed that 12.5% of households were in that very low income category, and 11% in the 30 to 50 category, low income. 16% of the households from 50 to 80% are moderate income, and then upward in the scale. So this is not the income this is the income distribution of the whole county, and Issaquah, as well as every other city, is responsible for planning in some way to provide housing for that scale. It may not all end up in Issaquah, but every community has a part to play in it.
Excuse me.
Yes.
Sorry, real quick. If you go back to that slide, so that's the current makeup?
Well, this was in 2009.
Okay, and affordable housing need. I'm just trying to understand, is this like a projected demand figure, or is this the current situation?
It can be thought of as a demand figure, but we use the word need. These are the people that exist in our county and need affordable housing.
Okay.
I might add there, Mike's worked there 4 years, I've worked there 25 years. That percentage split has not changed a whole lot in the 25 years. I mean, so it's sort of it does have enough historic perspective that you sort of use it forward speaking. And I would add that
They can't hear you, so if you,
I'm trying to give you, does that one reach?
find out.
Oh, look at that.
So that's a pretty good indication of history, and if anything, we've actually seen a slight increase in when you had the
still
30.
can't hear you.
The mic's not on.
There you go, okay.
Now you need to jump on 1 foot. Kidding.
That split, when you add the 12.5 and the 11.1% together, that's 23.6%. That number, if anything, has gone up slightly. We were probably a couple percent, but that split that you see there has shown to be pretty historically stable, that basic mix.
So I guess the reason for my question is, if that's the current makeup, well, my first question is, where do they live currently in that housing stock? And then second, if you add more affordable housing, do you effectively increase the number of people and affect this distribution? And how do you account for that? I'm specifically thinking, I mean, there might be people living outside the county now that would live here if the affordable housing was available. So what is that? How do you project the influx or immigration from other counties if the housing becomes available?
There's a lot in that
Indulge
set of questions.
It's a great question.
Yeah.
Indulge some patience because there's more to the story than just
Okay.
this.
Okay, great.
That's what
We may help you
But I'm gonna make a
get the
note of
context
that.
on that. Right.
if we try to address it by the end of the evening.
So
I have one question there. I'm not understanding the colors on the graph, renter, owner, those numbers, like the first one, 71,100 and the 26,900. I don't know what those numbers mean.
So in this snapshot, 71,100 renter households made less than 30% of the median income.
So that's number of households.
Yes.
And the 26,900 is
Those were owner
households under that.
homeowners.
Okay, thank you.
So do what people of all these incomes live in Issaquah now? Well, probably, but we want to think about this first in terms of employment. We know that people of those incomes work in Issaquah because they have occupations such as these who we depend on every day for various kinds of employment. That was generally in the $15 range. These are in the $20 range. On an annual basis, $20 makes $42,000 a year, and for a family of four, that falls into what we would call low income. This is a kind of a fuller picture to show a range of jobs, mostly in the low and moderate income groupings. The detail is in your book in this appendix table if you want to go back and look it up. But of the five major categories, I think it is that private sector jobs, Issaquah's wages tend to run lower than the countywide average.
And Mike, what does FIRE stand for again?
FIRE stands for Finance, Insurance, and Real Estate.
Thank you.
WTU stands for Wholesale, Transportation, and Utilities. The other two that aren't here are services, which includes a lot of tech jobs, and what am I forgetting? I'll think of the other one later. I would mention that the retail, construction, and fires, if you add that to the government and education, which are not shown here, but also tend to be, moderate types of incomes, those make up over 30% of your daytime population. So should supply and demand take care of that in the housing market? Well, the problem is the balance between the jobs in the community and the housing in the community often don't match up. We calculate what we call a jobs housing balance, and it's meant to show the demand for housing from the jobs that are in your community, assuming that each household has 1.4 workers on average. And if we look first at the East King County part of it on the far left, you see that East King County as a whole stopped being bedroom suburbs in the 1990s or late 80s perhaps, because the demand for housing from jobs was higher than the amount of housing that was there. That's why that yellow or gold bar is up above 1. 1 means that there would be a balance between the demand and the supply. In Issaquah's case, I think the next one, in Issaquah's case, it actually started before that. Issaquah hasn't been a bedroom town, so to speak, since the 70s. But Issaquah's number ratio is, as of 2006, was 1.5, meaning that there's more demand than supply. And the 2031 target represents the number of jobs and housing units that are prescribed in your existing plans, you know, part of the employment and housing targets that are allocated throughout the county. And so just that segment, the change between 2006 and 2031 would represent a jobs housing balance or imbalance, if you will, 2.5. So it has the effect of pulling up your existing ratio and making it worse, if you will, or exacerbating that imbalance between demand and supply. Is that clear? Can I answer any questions about that?
Just to be clear, it looks like, according to that, Issaquah has the largest out of balance projected for the future by far of anyone else.
Well, we're not
There's
showing.
some other cities that are looking the same way.
Yeah, I don't have the others all committed to memory, but it's certainly one of the highest.
So just to reiterate what Mike said earlier, if you look on each of these slides, you'll see a reference to where in the document you received has more detailed, and it will show each city. And Redmond's up there too. So there are a couple other cities. I think yours shows the biggest increase, but Redmond's starting higher than you are right now, and then it actually got a little bit better. But so you're not alone, but you're pretty far up there on that ratio.
Yes, sir.
I'm just curious. I mean, is 2006 the most recent set of data that you can get? Because I'm curious. A lot's happened in Issaquah since 2006. There's housing and jobs and the whole thing. I mean, is there a way to get updated data as to how we stand currently?
Really?
Yeah, sure.
The reason we use 2006 is because under state law, you're also doing a thing called buildable lands report. And that is the measuring stick. We know how much has been built since 2006, and you've actually probably been going, you're getting closer to your 2031 target for housing. You're getting there pretty fast. But the reason we use 2006 is that's a benchmark that all the cities used for doing an analysis of land capacity. And then that's also when you start your target time period. It's 2006 to 2031. So we're just matching that point in time. We do have other data that shows, and if anything, it's showing Issaquah's even going faster to their housing, but also their employment. So, so this is the brown bars are based on your planning targets that are in your comp plan.
Okay.
That's why we use 2000.
So are we still around that 1.5, or are we?
We'd have to look more carefully to see today where you are between 1.5 and 2.5. I think the point we're trying to make here is that based on your plans, goals, it's presumably could put even more pressure on your system.
Got it.
So we also have some real-world confirmation, if you will, and you may be familiar with this report, Issaquah Business Community Survey. Surveyed employers who ranked housing affordability as the top issue regarding retaining and recruiting employees, and asked if they would help recruit and retain employees. 62% said that more affordable housing would be helpful. Firms also linked attrition and recruitment difficulties to the commute time. So even if they can make it to work, they have trouble making it there. There was also a strengths, weaknesses, opportunity, threat type of analysis done by the Economic Vitality Committee last year, which said that there are some large influences in our community that could negatively affect our future if they were to leave or not support the city's future vision. And the key players that they named are there. That report went on to say that if employees cannot afford to live in the communities in which they work, or there's not an adequate supply of housing, then they're forced to endure long commutes which are harmful to the environment, limit time spent with family, and pursuing other interests. If access to affordable housing is an issue, some decide to leave the area, impacting employers who are unable to hire and retain the workers they need to sustain and grow their businesses. So to kind of sum up this employment piece of the analysis, this jobs housing imbalance creates an excess demand for housing relative to the local supply. Your local workforce includes a number of moderate and lower paying jobs, and those have their own demand or needs for certain types of housing that perhaps different market qualities and prices, but also those may contribute to the type of commutes that people experience. It's noted here that if you look at, now this is a little bit dated, but we're trying to get something more current. But if you look at the East King County as a whole, geographically about the same size as Seattle. In Seattle, 75% of the workers people who work in Seattle live in Seattle. But on the east side, only 50% of the workers live on the east side. Now, it's not geographically comparable, but it's interesting that only 10% of the people who work in Issaquah live in Issaquah.
When you say East King County, do you mean East King County inside the urban growth boundary? Or
Yes.
all of East King County?
No, inside the our cities is basically our 15 cities and unincorporated King County in the urban growth boundary.
Inside the urban growth boundary. Got it.
So if only 50% or 10% live in Issaquah, where do the other ones live? How far away, what is the area that, and is there, what's the relationship of affordable housing in those areas that allow people to live there and commute?
There's a lot of data to answer that. Perfectly great question. I don't have a pat answer for it.
So what was the last part of your question? I missed the second part of the question. I just wanted to...
Where do they live? What is the amount of workforce housing in the neighboring areas so that allows people to live there instead of Issaquah and commute?
So you've raised a really important general question, and one of the things that was behind why ARCH was created in the first place and why, when we did this housing needs analysis, one of the reasons for deciding to do a joint one is because it's a market area. Housing markets aren't defined by city boundaries. And when ARCH was first created 20 some odd years ago, we defined the area that we wanted membership to consist of based on what we thought a market area was, where there was enough comparability of issues that cities could learn from one another. So your question is, why we often show you the East King County is because you're kind of part of a market area. So understanding beyond what's on your boundary, but we give you all the data for your city too, so you can look at just your city. Now, if your city had the jobs housing balance that we showed you, and all the surrounding towns had a lower ratio, then maybe there's no issue at all. And that's sort of what you're getting at.
That's what I'm getting.
The point is, when you look at that graphic, and if you can go back to back a couple, one more, is if you were to look in your chart, what you would see, we have a comparable chart like this that's on page 111 of the report, is you would see a pattern like that for almost every city in East King County. So that's why you see when you see all East King County, and that is including the unincorporated, the bars are going up. But almost every city, you're seeing that bar go higher and higher and higher, and most of them have gone above 1, okay? So what that means is, and that's one reason we almost don't even talk about the 10% live and work in Issaquah, because it's such a small area that it's when you start realizing there isn't a place right next door for those workers to go because they're putting similar pressure on the system. We also include Seattle in there because what we're showing you is with Seattle, that was the historic area. That was the job center, and we were the bedroom community for them. It's not like Seattle's gone down. So we now have created two of our 3 centers of our region that are generating more demand for housing, where it used to just be one part of the region, Seattle. Now it's East King County and Seattle. So in terms of workforce housing, is there places where for some of the workers, you're going to see that the affordability profile is not a whole lot different in the rest of East King County than it is in Issaquah. So that's part of the reason why maybe we have traffic issues, or you're going to see some other demographic information talks about cost burden. So you've asked the perfect question, and one reason we're showing you this is we're saying your story isn't a lot different than anyone else in East King County, so cumulatively we have a lot of pressure on our system in terms of affordability for a lot of our workforce.
Actually, I knew the answer to the question,
Right.
but I felt I had to
Right.
ask it. Go on.
No, that's great. So,
Okay, we'll move to demographics. And we'll kind of start here with the summary and then work backwards into the detail. One thing that we found across East King County, Arthur's already alluded to, is that the communities are becoming more mature. And what we mean by that is that the cities demographically are becoming more like King County as a whole. We also find that in terms of household types and population ages and so forth, that they're not, we're not all just young families in our communities anymore, that we have diversities of ages and household types and so forth. With respect to Issaquah, well, I was, like Arthur said, I've only been here 3 years. I was floored by the growth in Issaquah and how much bigger it was than other East Side communities. But what's happened demographically in the community is that Issaquah was distinct in a number of ways, and now it's much more like the rest of the county, especially in terms of, as I said, population age, household types, and home ownership is much higher than it was in the past. These are all details that you can find in the report. There still are a couple of distinguishing features. One is that the median income in the city is lower from others in East King County, but there's also a lower rate of poverty. At the same time, there's a higher incidence of housing cost burden. I'll define that for you later.
but your median income is still higher than countywide averages. We're just saying
yeah.
within East King County.
Yeah. So, household types. We look at 5 different types, if you will, of households. And what has happened in Issaquah is that this married with children piece of the pie has grown dramatically. And that in combination with the others looks very similar to East King County. There's a county pie in there that you can compare that to. Another notable thing, though, is the combination of living alone and married without kids, 1 and 2, which accounts for most of the 1 and 2 person households, is, well, it's 56% here, but if you look at actually all the 1 and 2 person households, it's over 60% in Issaquah. So that kind of raises a question about what kind of housing those people really desire. And is there a latent need out there for other types of smaller units like accessory dwelling units or cottages or some other types of innovative housing, if you will?
So what do you,
Sure.
oh, go ahead.
I was just going to say, so if that's the, somewhat current snapshot of Issaquah, do you have a similar snapshot for what you think the demand would be for affordable housing? Meaning, the folks that fall into the affordable housing categories, are they going to be matching that? Or is it more families with children? Or do you have any?
We do have some information on that. Yeah, we'll bring some of that out and see if you still have questions about it.
Okay.
No, I have one. You
Yeah.
talked about the different kinds of units. Have you looked, is there any inclination to look at the pods that are being built in Seattle to move anything like that for affordable housing out here?
We haven't heard of any in Issaquah per se, but yes, in Redmond there are 2 projects already, and in Kirkland there are 2 on the drawing board.
I think more, are you looking at that type of construction for affordable housing? Is that something that that works and is part of what you think it should be.
So I'd like to make two comments. One is a general. What you're asking now is perfect, because what we're making connections between this and housing issues is what we're trying to get your thoughts and inputs on. So this is the perfect line of questioning and commenting that we're looking for. So keep it up. That's good stuff. On the pods, everyone know what the pods are? Okay. No, I see a no. So pods are very small efficiency units. You may only have a microwave as a cooking, and you might have a small down the hallway kitchen that people share, and your unit will be 200 square feet, maybe 300 square feet. Very, very small, efficient. They usually do come with a complete bath, but the sink may be your kitchen sink too. Very, very small units. Their rent, from a development point of view, they're an interesting mix. Per square foot, they get the highest rents per square foot of anything in Redmond, but per unit, they're the most affordable units. The ones in Redmond, there's a DigiPen. Everyone heard of DigiPen? They're a tech college, or I don't know, post-high school college program, and they know a lot of people from that program are living there, but other people live there as well. So the answer is the person who built the first one in Redmond is the same person who built the second one in Redmond. So that's telling you there's a market response. And he's the same person trying to build them in Kirkland, and my guess is he'll be in your town within 4 or 5 years proposing something in your town too. Okay. So it does seem to have a market response. So. And does it answer all of them? No, but for some needs, it's a way that the market can be responsive.
I know they're popping up in Seattle. And
exactly. Right.
Here we're looking at changes in population age. Again, this is all of East King County, but Issaquah's is very similar. And I think it's interesting that this change here from 90 to 2000 in this age group moved up to this exact same change here in the next 10 years. And we probably expect to see 65 to 75 increase in a similar pattern. There was some increase already in the 55 and up group, and actually Issaquah has a little bit higher population in the 75 and up to begin with, probably because of existing elderly housing, senior housing. So we know that we can expect a proportion of seniors to grow as well as the number. In fact, the figure that I keep hearing over and over is that the number of seniors is going to double in 30 years. So we expect them to increase proportion as a percentage also. But seniors who rent are relatively cost burdened, meaning they spend more than they can afford on housing. Some seniors, especially the most elderly, have specialized housing needs, as you probably know. And what you may also know is that senior specialty housing or housing options are fairly plentiful on a proportionate basis in Issaquah already. So, a question to think about, especially when we get into the policy discussions, is to what extent do you want to continue to address or give priority to senior housing?
I guess it's always good to take into account the more popular notion of aging in place too. So not out building the care facilities, because there's quite somewhat of a shift, and I'd say probably more significant shift toward aging in place in the future.
Great, thank you.
So that's, again, we just had a conversation in another city, and trying to get policy direction from them, one of the items was there are different kinds of senior needs, and therefore, instead of just having one policy for seniors, and the two themes seem to be specialized forms of housing that may be used by seniors, but the other is ability to age in place and encouraging that as well. So two very different approaches. And what I would point out is in the data that's in the report, one thing that we've noticed in the last 25 years is that the proportion of seniors who are over age 75 has gone up significantly. So where it used to be 1/3 were over age 75 and 2/3 between 65 and 75, it's now an even split. And those who are over 75 may find themselves needing more specialized forms of housing, short-term or long-term. And so that's one trend that we have seen that may have some level of impact on senior needs, is that balance of, the 65 to 75 may have a little bit different mixture of needs between those two kinds versus those 75 and over.
Speaking of demographic shifts, have you seen any, as baby boomers start to retire in massive numbers now, generally downsizing? Has that had any impact at all on housing stock need or changes? Are they now consuming more of the smaller housing stock that normally we would say would go to a starter family or a lower income family? I haven't posed the question. I don't know.
Yeah, I haven't seen any, statistic-based conclusions on that. Just, experientially or anecdotally, it seems to be both, just like the question of, whether people want to age in place or find senior service-supported communities or things like that. It's, it depends on the person or the
What they're
couple.
looking for is one-floor units, whether they're single-family homes or elevator accessible,
Are you talking about boomers or seniors?
both.
Boomers when they become seniors.
Yeah, both.
So
Yeah, that
At least
seems,
that's what I'm finding in my business. So it's more of a, I want a single level because I want to stay here. I don't want to move, and I don't like steps. So
So there's a lot of answers to your question, and that, which is essentially building on what Commissioner Aaron was saying, that a lot of seniors, they want to stay in their homes or whatever, or they want to stay in their neighborhoods, and so there's a certain amount who want to age in place. I was developing senior housing in the 80s, and we made the mistake, the development community made the mistake of saying they came up with a model for putting seniors in housing with services, and they looked at the wealth they had and everything, and they assumed, okay, we're going to be able to get 25, 30% of all seniors to go into these kind of housing. And because they said they got the money, they got this, so why wouldn't they do it? And the mistake we all made back then was because that home equity they had was their nest egg to take care of emergencies, not to pay for their day-to-day living. And so in the end, maybe only 15% instead of the assumed 30% went to that different kind of housing. But the market's out there watching really carefully, and your community has a number of communities targeted for seniors. And so there is a whole industry out there who is trying to tailor the needs. And so, again, this is sort of now one of the implications for housing questions. Is the comment I would make is it's hard to say exactly as a city what that demand is going to be. Now, but there are a group of people out there who make a living out of responding to market and changing markets, and that's your development community. And so one of the questions that we raise in general with commissions and thinking about how you deal with it, instead of always saying, we're going to plan precisely about what we think each need is, instead it's maybe thinking about it is, do we leave enough flexibility to allow the market to respond to changing needs and make it so that we don't become too big of a burden to the market responding to what is working out in the market? And so what can we do to get the market to be the, this country relies primarily on the market to create its housing. Yet we have challenges. It might be, are they building to the right needs, or are they building the right affordability? But one of the first steps I always say for city is try to have the market be able to take as much care of the needs in your community as absolutely possible. So, for example, accessory dwelling units. Doesn't cost public money to do it. It creates very affordable forms of housing. It may allow someone to age in place because they have someone on their property with them. And so it can be a way to allow very flexibly, but still done in a way that fits into the community. So I think that's one of the messages we like for people to think about, is it isn't always about regulating to success. It might be giving enough flexibility to have a good community, but allowing that market to do some shifting around as needs change.
let's take a quick look at race, ethnicity, and so forth, because although it's not really clear always what impact this will have on housing, as Arthur just said, that we try and take the approach that cities should be sensitive to and accommodating when market needs do shift, and ethnicity may have an impact on that. So you know as well as I do from the numbers that the ethnic profile has changed in Issaquah just as it has throughout the county, and this illustrates that in a couple of ways, including the percentage of people who are born outside the U.S. So Issaquah is becoming more diverse, and human services programs and housing, being related to that, we want to try and be sensitive and responsive to those things, especially if those characteristics that I just showed you have some impact on the English language proficiency of the people involved, and what kind of needs may appear because of that. And then there's the kind of open question about whether or not we'll see demands for different types of housing. Okay, I mentioned housing cost burden a couple of times. Let me define that more explicitly. So, long-standing definition of housing cost burden is any household, but particularly lower income households, if they pay more than 30% of their gross income on housing costs, including utilities. And the reason why I say particularly lower paying, because there's a belief that if you're making less than middle income, say, that the more of your housing costs that go to housing, or more of your income that goes to housing, the harder it is for you to afford other essential necessities like food and clothing and so forth. It's not such a threat at 30% of income if you're already making more than middle income. We found that a large portion of the people who are cost burdened are, other way around, large portions of lower and very low income people are cost burdened. But looking at the profile of cost burdened households, they tend to be younger, people who are just starting out, or older, and in particular renters. And then a more concerning thing is what's known as severe cost burden. That's when people are actually paying more than half of their incomes on housing. Half of the cost burden renters and a third of cost burden homeowners pay more than half of their incomes on housing. This chart is meant to illustrate that the relationship between income and cost burden. So it's pretty dramatic to show that when your income's really low on the left-hand side, there's a great likelihood that you're cost burdened, and when your income is much higher, there's a much lower likelihood. And here, going back to the comment about renters, we see that renters tend to be more likely to be cost burdened, although there was, through the recession, a real uptick in cost burden among homeowners. Issaquah residents, on the whole, have a higher percentage of cost burden compared to the rest of East King County. I believe it's similar to the county average, but it's a little more common in Issaquah than other cities around you. And going back to the homeowner comment, it went up quite a bit. I think something like 13 to 21% of the homeowners became cost burden. The thing about the 50%, the severe, that cost burden, that's when they say that you're right on the edge of becoming homeless. So we also want to be aware and attentive to homelessness, which is common in East King County as it is throughout the county. This has some statistics that have kind of held up over time throughout the county in the various one-night counts and so forth. Again, this year more than 8,000 people were counted as homeless, and actually 3,100 people just last month were counted outdoors in King County. On the east side, the number went down a little bit, but it's still higher than it was in the past. Also, we have in the report data on homeless children as reported by school districts, and so you can see in there specifically about the Issaquah School District. Fortunately, that number went down last year, but at 124 counted throughout the year, it's still noteworthy. And then the East King County has a homelessness plan that is part of the bigger county homelessness plan, and this plan included the needs projected back in 2005, and this shows what's been added since then. So there's been a lot of progress, but still short of what the estimated need was in all three of these categories.
And I'd just like to jump in with a quick comment on the homeless, on two quick comments. On the homeless data, you know, I've been in some meetings earlier today with groups who work on homelessness in East King County, and going back one slide is that the one-night count was just done where they go out during the evening and count people who are in no form of shelter. They're either in a car or camping out and things. And we know we're not getting complete because we can't go up on Tiger Mountain and get all the folks there, but there were several hundred people counted in East King County during that count who are in East King County who are without shelter. We also have several shelters for families and singles and young adults as well. So when we're talking about homelessness and it's a countywide issue, it isn't because we don't have homelessness in East King County. And similarly, we don't have a slide on it, but there is slides about households who are in supplemental security income, and so there is another percentage of our community that have special needs or other things that make it difficult for them to live day to day without some kind of support services. And again, we have that in East King County just as we do in, you know, in other parts of the county. So that information is in the part that Mike was referencing, some more detail and information on that. So,
And I think you're probably missing some huge data too on people that are homeless that are couch surfing.
right.
Because there's quite a bit of those people now, especially in the last 2 months of unemployment being cut off. There's
Yes, and to some degree
number's-
that might be getting picked up on with the school data, because the school data definition of homeless sometimes includes that. But you're right. It's, you know, when we're doing the one-night count, those are the people who've gotten all the way to the circumstance where they're not in a heated space during the night, on a cold night in January. And there's still other people who are finding other ways to skimp by that really isn't a housing unit for a family, but sharing or other shelters or things along those lines. So good, thank you. That's a good point.
So we have a few observations about on the supply side of things. And to no surprise, rents in East King County are relatively high. Average rents tend to be in line with moderate incomes, and rents also often follow the pattern of changes in income. And you'll see there are some charts in the report that illustrate that nicely. But in East King County, just in the last couple of years, rents have gone up quite a bit more than income, and that probably reflects the catching up that the multifamily industry has been trying to do. This chart is meant to show the differences in different areas of the county. Seashore means Seattle and shoreline. East is the east side and South County, and then also showing some rural and unincorporated areas. But this is showing that East King County has a low proportion of rental housing affordable and very low rental housing and ownership at the lower income. So the dot or the line shows the percentage of units, rental units that are affordable, and the bar shows the actual number of units.
When you put together when you're looking at the rise in cost of rents, do you take into consideration, it's going up because the higher end is going up? Do you separate how much the lower end is actually going up? A lot of, the higher end homes or rentals are based for people who can afford them. And there's a lot of rents going on now because housing inventory is so low. They have to rent. Do you separate the two, or do you find that medium number based on everything put together?
The median, when we show median numbers, it's everything put together. But the median, being the middle, kind of helps control for, the extreme highs as well as the extreme lows. Whereas if we took an average, that would be more distorted.
I'd just like to know if, the lower rents are going up higher than the higher ones.
So right. So this is taking your lower end and showing you proportionately in East King County how much of our housing is affordable, rental housing is affordable at 50%. That's not giving you the time change, but it is showing you proportionally have a pretty low percentage of ours. To your question, the closest in terms of the data is not, again, a time snapshot, but we do at a point in time snapshot figure out how much of the rental housing is affordable at each income level and how much housing is affordable, ownership housing is affordable at different income levels. And so we will be tracking that because that's now become one of the key measures. We will keep tracking that over time. So while the graph that he was describing doesn't distinguish lower and higher, we have another table that shows how much of our housing is affordable at each income level, which I think is a different way that gets similar to your question.
Yeah.
But that's it.
Can I ask a quick question? One, I apologize, I have to leave in a second, but I wanted to ask probably a very oversimplified question. Is this whole topic purely just a supply and demand issue in East King County in the market? I mean, is that really at the root of what we're talking about? Because I'm looking at this thinking there's this huge demand and all this need for affordable housing. Mm-hmm. How come the market, adding 1,000 units of market rate apartment living in every city in East King County, wouldn't that bring supply up with demand and effectively bringing rates down? I'm just wondering what's missing in the market that isn't causing that to happen.
Yeah, a lot of good questions.
Sorry about that.
No, that's, I'd say it's partially yes, but I wouldn't say it's completely yes. You would find that probably even in areas where you have more balance, you're still going to have cost, like the proportion of cost burden households doesn't go way down in other parts of the county because the housing supply has a general, in this region for whatever reason, doesn't seem to do well, and the lower end is often cost burden in almost any market. So, and that's the imperfection of the market. So some of it's imperfection of the market. The other question that could still be a gap, even if you increase supply, is it matching what the demand is necessarily? So what the market, and that's why I said flexibility market, the market, if it overbuilds something, some people will get smart about it and correct. So the pods, somebody figured out in the marketplace, there's a demand there, and they were smart enough to say, it hasn't been built before, but I'm going to do it and hope it works. The building industry in general, for a lot of good reasons, that's hard to do. to take on the future need because they're generally looking at what happened 4 years ago or 2 years ago. That's what you get financing for. It's hard to get financing for where the world's going to. So what we sometimes do with communities is you take all this information that we're doing, and what you do is you could create a grid of different household types and different income levels. And ideally, what you would do in the end is you have a housing stock that completely matched type of households and income levels. That's hard to do. So what we found, like when you look, we're about to get to a slide on creating of affordable units. And you're going to see Bellevue created a fair number of moderately priced units through the market. They're all small rentals, or the vast majority are. Yet in that income profile, this goes to your earlier question, well, is that the need? It's like, no, the need is pretty much similar to the demographic profiles we've been showing you. There are families, there are people who want to rent, there are people who want to own. So while it's still good that through the market we created that, it wouldn't necessarily, if you just increased everything, naturally be a fit, okay? So it's more complicated, but it is a starting point to the conversation, no doubt about it.
Yeah.
But it doesn't get you to the end to just say increase a number.
Yeah, no, understood. And I knew I was oversimplifying it when I asked the question. It was just the thought in my head. I'd be curious to ask a bunch of developers or apartment builders and just say, why not?
So for example, I was talking to an apartment builder who's looking at some property in a little more of an outlying area, and his unit mix, again, these are the smart developers. He goes, we're putting in more 3 bedrooms in this development, much more than we normally do, because we think in this community, that's where there will be interest and demand for it, okay? One of the big issues that cities have faced 10 years ago, this is my point about flexibility to allow the market to sort of pick up on this stuff, is a lot of cities forever use density for defining how much you could build. 20 units to the acre, 30 units to the acre. And in our centers, the builders have said, no, give us FAR, floor area ratio. Because if you're based on density, the market forces doesn't allow them to build small units. You've got to build bigger units because you're paying per land cost by not a square foot number, but a unit number. So if you build smaller units, which get less revenue, you're hurting, it's harder to make the economics work. So they have to sit around and not maybe build as much because the landowner says, I want this much per unit. Where if you go by per square foot, the builder can say, I can do bigger, I can do smaller, okay? So that was a big push, and almost all jurisdictions do that now outside, you know, in the communities we work with and parts of their community. That's an example of how you use your city controls to still leave flexibility. And it took the builders telling communities that before they started to get it, and now we all do, or most of them do, and so now you are seeing the product. But now they all went really small. So now some are saying, well, we can't all go really small. We have to figure out some balance to that.
Right.
So that's
Okay.
the challenge of the market.
Well, as I depart, I thought I'd leave you with a very complex question. Thank you very much.
So you're not going to get builders to build 1,000 units of affordable housing
Right.
without them making a profit. They're not going to build anything that they're going to lose money on.
Right.
And what the cities have to do is work with the builders in order to somehow get impact fees eliminated or something in order to get that. And so that's where you're going to get the cost. I mean, builders will build them, but they have to make money. I mean,
Right.
that's the way life
And,
is.
and your city has, so again, this is where the policy conversation comes in, is it may be, and my guess is, and you guys have a pretty good comp plan right now. I mean, what we're finding is, and looking at policies is, you first wrote this in the early 90s, and there's certain issues out there that aren't really addressed much because people weren't talking about it much. One is homelessness. Some might be around senior and maybe just had a generic statement and not something that's a little more refined. Another is sustainability, right? Principles and concepts weren't around. And the other is mixed-use centers, which those plans. So, but having policies that say things just like what you were just saying is, what can the city do to help incent and make the economics work better for a builder so that maybe they can have some affordability? And if they do give those things, then we want something in exchange. So just like you're doing in your Central Issaquah plan, That plan says, here's your base zone. You want to go higher, great, but we want some of that extra height to be for affordability. In other words, we don't want all the extra development capacity to go to the landowner as value, increased land values. We want some back in public benefits. So in Central Issaquah, you ask for some open space benefits and some affordability benefits, but hopefully it doesn't necessarily hurt their economics because it's sensitive to economics, because you're absolutely right. They can't just build it because we ask them to.
Okay, I'll try and pick it up here. But the discussion's excellent. So the good news is that Issaquah and all East Side cities have kept pace with the housing targets, the general housing targets, and have appear to be plenty of capacity to meet the goals through 2031. One of the things that we try and look closely at, though, is how much of that residential growth capacity is in mixed-use type of zoning. And in Issaquah's case, there's a lot of it. That's the green portion at the bottom of each of the bars. And so on the left axis, the vertical axis shows the housing target. And this shows that including some of the housing that's already built, the city has capacity for 150% of its target. And then there's still mixed-use capacity for almost 100% of the target. So lots of capacity there. And mixed-use capacity is good because it often creates opportunities for other goals that the city wants to meet related to sustainability and affordability and so forth.
Could you go back to the
Yes.
slide real quick? This is also the reason we put this out here and we highlight this is, again, it's sort of the very first story I said. It's not just you by yourself, but when you look at East King County, and many of the jurisdictions are taking a very, very similar approach to how to accommodate growth, which is in mixed-use centers. And there is no guarantee in a mixed-use center what you're going to get. They can do office, commercial, or housing. And so the reason we bring that up is, and in fact, Tricia's comment at the very beginning of the meeting about measuring every year how much housing is being created in the Central Issaquah area, part of that is because you're assuming you're going to get a certain amount of housing in that central area. And if that doesn't happen, remember that jobs housing balance we were showing? What does it do if some of those areas intended for housing don't go housing? Okay? And the other issue that comes up here often, and look at how many cities are at 50% or higher, Bellevue, Redmond, where it's over 70% of their capacity for growth is in these mixed-use centers. This, I'm not saying it's a bad thing, but we have set ourselves up as a region to really rely on this to meet a lot of our housing growth. So one, is it really going to happen? And do we watch it? And some cities have taken the step of ensuring it will happen. In other words, they've layered on some extra rules. Issaquah made the decision with Central Issaquah not to do that at this point, but rather monitor, let's see how well the market does it. But the reason for monitoring is if they don't, then maybe you have to do like Redmond did in Overlake. And they created a neighborhood where FAR for commercial development in one part of it is very low. But FAR, if you have housing, is a lot higher. In other words, we're saying you can stay how you are, but if you redevelop in this small corridor, we want housing. And they didn't want to take the risk of that not happening because a lot of these mixed-use centers don't have a lot of housing today. So it is a shift. You know, Bellevue didn't have it when I first got here in downtown. Redmond didn't have it 10 years ago. So it can happen, but we're really relying on that. The other part of that is if we're really relying on this, we're also relying on this meeting a lot of needs, different kinds of needs, and not just the single person necessarily. So are these going to be communities that are vibrant long-term from a market point of view because they can meet a variety of different needs? So we've been emphasizing this for about 5 years with cities, when the 2006 report came out. And we just saw this data And again, not a bad story, but it's one to really be conscious of because all the other cities are using a similar approach.
So remember at the beginning when we looked at the chart with the blue and red stacked bars and how the needs were distributed by different household incomes? And we said that countywide planning policy calls for every city to try to address a proportionate share of those needs. Well, East Side cities overall are on a pace for 66% of the moderate income part of that goal. And Issaquah in particular has hit 62% of that moderate income segment. On the low income side, that is below 50% of median income, the achievement's a lot lower. So we're only on track there for about a quarter across the east side and 16% in Issaquah. Almost all of those low income units require some kind of financial assistance. We do a lot of tracking of this kind of stuff as well, and these are the figures that support the percentages that I was just talking about. This is for, also in your appendix, but it breaks it down according to how those units were created or what the public sector at least did to create them. Direct assistance means some kind of financial support, either in cash form or fee waivers or land grants, things of that nature. Land use incentives could be density bonuses or other forms. And then market, we actually go and survey all the multifamily units that have been opened each year and find out what they've sold at or what rents they're charging.
So there is a
Yes.
$40 charge to record any real estate thing, deed, whatever. Does any of that money come directly to you?
No, but it goes to projects that cities are funding. So, because we don't build any housing.
Okay.
So when people come to Arch and get funding, it's an agency like Imagine Housing or Hope Link. They're getting money from us, the county, and the state often for the capital, and then some of that capital is from that recording fee, and then they have ongoing services, and there they apply to the county for the service dollars, and a lot of that is from that recording fee. In fact, that's the highest proportion.
Okay.
So what I'm seeing in this is that there's a huge inequality in incentives, whether that's, assistance in general, between low income and moderate.
Clarify that. I'm not quite sure I'm following the comment.
Well, when you look at the numbers, and I'm not even doing any math, there's almost a 50% difference between providing that incentive or direct assistance to someone that's in a low income bracket as opposed to someone that's in a moderate income.
Right.
So that's inequality to me in regards to not only available stock, obviously there's an inequality there, but there's an inequality in how much the two get assistance or incentives.
So you're saying it's too skewed to lower income?
What I'm saying is it's very much favoring moderate income.
Oh, overall. Okay, so you're correct. Now, here's the thing. Let me sort of tell a little story on these and a different little spin, and you're right. But you'll see with direct assistance, we are skewing that towards the low income. And for the moderate, almost all the direct assistance units, okay, remember, low income is 0 to 50% of median.
Yeah.
This is a great question or comment. And moderate income is from 50 all the way to 80% of median. The direct assistance and the moderate are almost all at 60% of median and below. And then the direct assistants are 30, 40, 50, homeless, all kinds, developmentally disabled. What we're trying to show here is that, back to your economics thing, you can't make money, is what we're trying to say is that when we allow, and that furthest to the right column, which is the market, the first step as a community is can we help the market just on its own create housing that's relatively affordable? And what we're saying is we've managed to, and most of these are in centers and they're smaller homes and stuff, that just through our land use regulations with no helping, the private sector has managed to create 2,790 units that are affordable to moderate. Okay? Now, when you look at that price chart that we showed you in the very beginning, to think that the market's going to come in. Now, we might add, because of the apodment, we might add in the next survey market rate units under law. We might, for the first time, you can see we have 43 from Kirkland, and guess what? That was Northwest University. So that was the school. So
What I was hinting at is that incentive, and we're going back to the comprehensive plan and what the policy commission does, as well as our officials in the city. You know, there's a huge inequality right there to me.
Right, but let me finish the explanation here. Is the middle column are the, you know, so to think that the market is going to get all the way down to low income, down to 50% of median with these are only new units. This isn't overall supply. That we're showing history is in East King County and probably almost anywhere, the market without any kind of assistance, it just doesn't really happen. Okay? But what we're saying is we can at least try to get some in the moderate. I mean, that's an accomplishment. If we probably hadn't done a lot of the planning we've done in the last few years, that number would be even lower. The land use incentives has a similar story, which is that we find that because of what the rent levels are at, the value of the land use incentives we can offer make it difficult to ask a private builder without cash assistance, but just through density bonuses, to get all the way down to 50% of median. Now, what we are having conversations with cities about, because you're raising a good point, is we're having more conversations with cities to say, okay, in the past, in the beginning, we would do a density bonus for every density extra unit. We want 1 unit at 80% of median. Okay? Now, in Kirkland right now, what we've done is we've added 2 different programs together, and we're saying we'll give you a 3-to-1 bonus, and we'll give you another incentive like fee waivers, and we want you to be at 60% of median. And it's a pure, in other words, we are trying to see if we can use incentives to get to a more, get lower at the moderate range and stuff. So that's part, so you raise a good question is, given the economics for a private builder and the incentives you have on the table, do you try to get more at one level or fewer at a more affordable level? And when you do so, how far do you go down? Is it worthwhile doing? And so we had that conversation in Central Issaquah, and I can't remember off the top of my head, but we are below 8, we're at 70 or 60% of median instead of the 80%. So you raise a very valid point, and again, that could be a policy question when you're looking at the comp plan is, do you say in your incentives moderate or say strive to try to do a balance of income levels when we do these incentives? But you can't forget the economics. You can't just sort of say, we need them at 50, so you do them at 50, and we're not going to give you anything more. So that's a trade-off conversation cities have to make. And this is sort of an ad for me, or for Arch. We're having a workshop. I think, did they get the invitations?
Yes.
Okay, so we're doing a workshop in like 3 weeks, and we're going to talk about what some cities have done, and we will be illustrating the Kirkland example, or others will be talking about how different people have tried to layer in order to try to accomplish something more affordable than just at 80%. So it's a very good point, but also have to balance it against those other considerations. And so what the message we usually say when we say this is, cities, don't forget about your land use and don't forget about incentives. Those are all different tools. Money alone is not going to get us there. We need to try to look at a wide range of tools to address this full range of needs that are in your community. So don't just think it's money. Don't think it's just market. And what we're saying is, in East King County, the most expensive market in the region, we're still finding that these other tools can still work to meet some of the affordability things as defined under GMA. And a lot of people would say, oh, that's not even possible. But we're saying, no, you have a history of doing that.
I'll skip the summary there and go on to housing strategies. So we have, and we've already broached this topic, but 4 main categories as far as this presentation goes. one set aimed at diversifying the housing stock, another set for affordable housing, and then we also address special housing needs. Let's see how many of these we've already talked about. We talked about floor area ratios instead of units per acre zoning. I don't know, we talked about cluster subdivisions or cottages so much, but we did talk about the mini suites. So these are a couple categories of efforts to diversify housing types and some examples of cities where they've already taken place. Whoops. In terms of affordability, we talked about a number of incentives. In Kirkland, Redmond, and Sammamish, the city proactively increased the development capacity and said along with that, you're going to give us some degree of affordability. In other places, Bellevue, Mercer Islands, we have Sammamish twice. I don't know if that's a mistake or if it's in both parts. But it's a voluntary, it's the choice of the developer whether to ask for the increased capacity and offer the affordability. Accessory dwelling units, that could also go under the diversification, but we consider them affordable on their face, and Mercer Island in particular has been really good at getting permitted ADUs. Kirkland and Mercer Island, and also Kenmore, which dropped off, has a multifamily property tax exemption. And Arthur mentioned how that's coupled in Kirkland in particular with the increased capacity incentives. Impact fee waivers are getting more common and have been made easier to adopt with recent state legislation. Oops. And then as far as direct support, we have our Arch Housing Trust Fund, which cities contribute to in a variety of means, some with general revenue, some with community development, block grant money. And the goal, as adopted by the executive board, which is all the chief executives of our member cities, is to have a geographic balance. And this has produced over 2,800 units in the last almost 20 years. Yes, sir.
What are the two percentages that are listed after each one of the categories of need?
Oh, right.
I'm interested in the population. We got 12%.
I've forgotten what that is.
Okay, so the first number is what the long-term goal was intended to be, or is based on analysis and lots of different input. The second, which is in parentheses, is what we've done. And this is resource, it's not number of units, it's percentage of resources. So, and as you noted, the one that we're most short on is senior and special needs. Now seniors, we think we're going to be right about back on par very soon on some proposals that are in front of us. The special needs and the homeless are difficult ones to distinguish from one another. We often find, depending on the time period, that, and so I almost add those two together because they're both forms of housing where people need help with day-to-day needs. So like Friends of Youth was under special needs, but they're also homeless. I mean, they're serving homeless youth and stuff. So we've been short there, but you can see we've been above on the homeless and transitional. And so, but part of the dilemma with the special needs is there's only so much service dollars. All of homeless and special needs need service dollars in order for them to work. We don't have service dollars. So when somebody comes to the cities and asks for capital funds for any of the last two categories, we say, how are you going to pay for the services? And so they're relying on being able to bring the services component to the table as well. So we don't, see large developments per se. We've done a lot of group homes for development disabled, which I know you're aware of, but they're done one home at a time by agencies because that's what they're able to pull funding together for. So we at least feel a little bit better that when we take those two together, we're pretty close to the long-term goal because there's a lot of overlap between those two categories.
Do you have any data on the future needs for particularly special needs people with developmental disabilities in adult family homes on the east side? For example, DSHS data shows that in the 2 zip codes here in Issaquah, that there's about 200 families that are parents are 60, 65 or older and have a developmentally delayed person living with them.
Right.
And as you mentioned earlier, the seniors want to stay in their communities and really want to have people with developmental disabilities be able to stay in the communities when either their parents can't take care of them or they're gone.
Right.
And if they're on the DSHS rolls, then as you pointed out, there needs to be service dollars. There is service dollars. But, how are we planning here in Issaquah to accommodate this need? And there's a federal lawsuit about 10 years ago, the Olmstead lawsuit, and it said that people in the institutions have the right to live in the communities. And because of that, a number of the states, including the state of Washington, are downsizing their institutions. So there has to be a place for those people to go in the communities. And I don't see it being, and I'm not being critical, but just overall, statewide, I don't see that being addressed or looked at. It's a small group, but it's a very, very vulnerable group.
Right.
And as you said, sometimes they're counted as the homeless, and it could be in 10 years they're going to be the homeless.
So,
And just to piggyback on your comment, I think that was great, for them to go back and stay within their communities and shutting some of those institutions down. But the lack of funding that occurred to be redirected to the communities to, follow up and nurture and support individuals is pretty much none.
so
The funding for the housing isn't there. The funding for support is there.
So here's great comment, and one I first want to point out: special needs is not only developmentally disabled. There's
No, that's
all
right.
kinds of
It's
different-
more.
There's people with AIDS. There's it was meant to mean anyone who would need help with daily living assistance. That's why I'm saying homeless and transitional versus special needs can sometimes you're sort of defining similar groups similarly because it's the assistance with daily needs in order to be able to live wherever you're living. And so it's not just developmentally disabled. So that's one thing to keep in mind when you're looking at that. The other is you tell a very compelling story. If we went back to the homeless slide, you'll see what our goal was, and you'll see what our numbers are at, a fraction of what the needs are. If you look at the other thing we told you, our target was whatever the number was, and we're at less than 25% of trying to achieve those needs. The dilemma I've had in my lifetime of 35 years of working in this industry is there's so many needs out there that we're challenged to meet the housing needs for. What Mike was describing here is we could take anyone, in fact, we bring together councils once in a while, and the last time we came together was right when the homeless plan was starting, and we said, you could take any one of these 4 categories and say, spend every dime that you have in any one of those 4, and you could spend all your money there, and you still might not meet the need for that category. And so what do? We have a choice. We can focus on one particular need, or we can say that we're going to try to address the range of needs that our needs analysis are identifying. And one of the comments I made to the councils when I made that comment is, if you go back to the very, very first slide, it said under the Growth Management Act, cities are supposed to identify the full range of needs, and then they're supposed to come up with strategies to try to help address the full range of needs. So in working for cities, I'm saying, if I were a foundation, I could say I'm a foundation who wants to work on senior housing. Okay? But your cities who we're now just spent you an hour and a half going through a wide range of needs, do you take this one resource that we've shown is the only thing, you got to have that to get to the lower income? Do you and say we want to do a variety of kinds of needs, or are we going to focus on one? And because of all the background, a lot of people say, and the agencies, when we get all the agencies around the table and ask them that question, they're all looking at each other, they realize, oh, okay, you're doing good stuff too. So that's our dilemma, is we're trying to address a range of needs, and we've never fully addressed any one of them adequately, because we're trying to address a wide range. And we're coming up, unfortunately, short on all of these. But we're at least trying to address them all to some extent, as hopefully as part of documenting for community that you're following the Growth Management Act kind of thing. So that's why when land use incentives can work with moderate, we skew our money part because it's a comprehensive approach to the lower income. Okay, but now we're starting to learn in the last 10 years, maybe there's ways to even try to get more lower by using some of those other two columns sometimes, because we're coming up so short on the low. Can we push some of those other areas to try to get to that lower need? That's our ongoing dilemma. It's choices and balancing, okay? And so that's kind of where we've been at. And about every 5 years ago, so we kind of go back to councils, we have them together, and we say, is this the right basic approach, a balanced approach? So no right answer, but that's kind of where we've been at.
I don't know if there's much need to cover these, but because we've already talked about them, but that's our last couple slides.
Thank you for this. I think it was really great, and as a huge supporter of very low income affordable housing, I know that I was a pain in the butt to a lot of my co-commissioners when we went through the Central Issaquah plan, that there wasn't enough units on there listed for building. So I really do thank you. I think the numbers really speak loudly to not only the east side but Issaquah, and I look at it from coming from a social service and a human service perspective, but I also look at it from an economic development and the vitality of our city and growing, that we cannot grow as a city if we don't accommodate for that growth, which means we have to have a variety of housing available. And by growing, I mean not only maintaining those major employers that you listed, but really attracting more major employers to our region, which then builds our community and supports the different levels of people that live in our community.
Well, I want to thank all of you for your questions and attention and really good discussion. I hope that this gives you a good reason to go back and study the report a little bit more, and welcome you to contact us again. Of course, we'll be back when it's time, at the appropriate time, to talk about what this means in terms of your comp plan policies going forward.
Thank you very much.
Very good.
As a realtor, I know the value of housing and the economic, not only the economic stability for the developers, but the economic stability for the community. And this is something that we really have to think about, and it all goes together. You can't have a vibrant community without the housing to go with it. And the housing, building the housing provides jobs which allow people to buy houses that will stimulate the economy, which is what we all want. So good luck, and thank you so much for your time.
Good luck to you. We'll be bringing, we just do the background. You have to make the hard choices and figure out what policies will work for your community.
Well, that brings up a good point, and I started with saying that we have a few openings on our Planning Policy Commission. So if you've heard anything tonight that you'd like to get that interests you, that you'd like to be part of in planning for the future of Issaquah, please fill out that application. It's online, and let's see if we can't get you to help us do this. So if there's nothing else, I'm going to call the meeting to close at 8:25. Close enough. Thank you.